Portal 2, for better or for worse, was Valve's swan song. This was the end of the era in which Valve placed all their eggs in the story-driven shooter basket, and instead placed them all in the monetize everything basket. But honestly, what a way to go out. Portal 2 is still visually stunning, technically impressive, and it might just contain one of the smartest uses of player motivation to drive its plot I've ever seen. To discuss exactly what's going on, we need to set some ground rules up. First of all, we are going to assume that each Portal 2 player played and beat the original Portal. Now we know that isn't true because Portal 2 outsold the original game, but this piece is important to driving player motivation. Portal's conflict is a simple but complex one all at the same time. GLaDOS serves as a faceless, disembodied voice driving a player through the game in the first half, with a bit of a cold, robotic flair. Maybe more than a little bit, actually. But the moment the player refuses to die and treks through the halls of Aperture science, the facade peels away. GLaDOS begins to directly insult the player character, attempt to kill them, and the robotic voice takes on a deeply more human quality as they try to make their escape, which ends with a fight against GLaDOS herself before being dragged back into the facility. Also, for the sake of this argument, we're going to assume a blind playthrough of Portal 2. Assume either we're back in 2012, or we somehow spent 7 years without hearing about a sequel. I'm sorry, Portal who? Portal who? But this whole conflict, all of this setting up, is so important to the player motivation. This isn't just what actions do the players take, but also why the player ends up taking them. This is why when we're first introduced to Wheatley, when he lacks any sort of robotic vocoder or filter, and he also seems to be trying to escape Aperture himself, the player is motivated to trust him. Straight away, the player has a common goal in Wheatley, and he has something the player never had: control. Wheatley, in the first couple chapters, acts as a keystone to activating hidden doors, but his general incompetence wakes GLaDOS from her... I'm sorry, how many years has it been?
50,000 years.
Yeah, I'm just gonna maybe chop a couple zeros off. Okay. Can we have that number? Okay, that looks a little better. That's the number. Oh wait, that comment isn't even canon, so we should actually just throw that whole joke away. Cool. The opening chapters have only male voices talking to the player. Wheatley, and an unseen, unknown Aperture science construct that seems to only exist to ensure future civilizations can portal test too. How thoughtful. Both of these characters seem mostly harmless in the opening, which contrasts greatly with GLaDOS, who was cold and cruel towards the player. There is a very direct shift in how the player interacts with the game here. Wheatley encourages the player to complete missions, jump off the rails, and explore. GLaDOS more or less forces the player to complete these missions. This pits the two characters against each other in the player's head. I, as a player, want to follow Wheatley's instructions and find a way out of GLaDOS' grasp, and he helps us disarm all of her traps and leave her powerless. And when offered that option during the stalemate resolution sequence, of course the player feels compelled to take that chance. Of course we want Wheatley in control. He'll help us get out. Hey, I'm sorry, I cut off past me because he didn't know all this would end up with us in a fucking hole. The Underground Aperture chapters begin to put both characters on ambiguous ground for the player. GLaDOS, who had previously been cruel and heartless, has to show humility in her current situation and entrusts the player to help her put things back together. Wheatley, who was once on our side, had used us to gain control against the former computerized head of the company. And surprise, he's an AI designed to make stupid decisions. Cue the flashback scene. He crashed through a wall. He believed stepping off the rail would kill us. He brute forced the password.
Hello, Gov. Neurotoxin Inspector.
It all makes sense now. We were duped. GLaDOS is willing to put our gripes behind to team up against this mutual enemy and scale back up to the current day Aperture science. And besides, GLaDOS is more or less powerless in her current form, so teaming up against the most tenacious member of Aperture's testing crew just makes sense. So now you're probably asking, wait, you're just reading a plot synopsis of Portal 2 out loud. How is this about the player's actions? Well, how about we say hello to a friend of ours? Sonic Forces. Give it up for Sonic Forces, everybody! Yeah. Woo! Sonic Forces is a game with an ambitious amount of story, but none of it ever really amounts to anything. And why is that? I mean, just play a bit of it. To convey what things are even happening to the player, they use dialogue. Amy tells us that Sonic's friends were all defeated by Infinite, but we don't see them being pushed back. The player's informed they've destroyed Chemical Plant, but they're just running through it all with no real destruction in sight. This is what Tell Don't Show looks like. The plot tries to justify the levels rather than vice versa, which leads to the experience feeling insincere. Portal 2 leads the player through its levels by the use of plot, and the player is directly in charge of starting or resolving major story beats. We're not just testing or exploring a level and then get told we've shut down the neurotoxin generator or destroyed the turret production line. We're directly responsible for these actions through the things we do as a player, and the game motivates us to complete these actions. Likewise, with the trek through Old Aperture, we aren't just playing levels until we're told we're done and back out. Each era's testing track ends with a puzzle in which we obtain a lot of verticality because we're directly climbing back up the side of Old Aperture Science to get back to the current facility and take the fight straight to Wheatley. And along the way, we are activating generators, which will let us use new mechanics in later puzzles, and we get to learn about Aperture's long-standing problems. Cave Johnson was a brilliant mind, though his brilliance was often misguided. I mean, the portal gun was originally designed to be a shower curtain, and was only ever seen as a device to test Aperture's other inventions, almost all of which they thought would be fiberglass-based food substitutes best tested with blue house paint as a control. Luckily, Cave Johnson has a morality chain, Carolyn, his somewhat naive personal assistant who is described as the backbone of this facility. Despite her best effort to appease Cave while also attempting to declaw Aperture's more dangerous scientific endeavors, Aperture hemorrhages money and causes several astronauts to vanish from existence, and the quick-witted Cave begins to cave in on himself, becoming a tired, dead-eyed recluse dying from inhaled lunar dust, damaging his lungs and causing him to fly into a rage about the failed life he led, ending his rants with discussions of dumping his mind into a computer before he dies. And when he does die, because he's so viscerally aware he's at death's door, he wants his assistant Carolyn in charge. Along the way, we even get to see the company bleed assets in its own test chambers. Early Aperture levels boast a lot of the same environmental design as modern-day Aperture. They're very much tight, enclosed boxes with very clear places where you can and cannot place portals. But as the levels progress and time passes, the number of surfaces, portable or otherwise, diminish as a means to use only as few resources as necessary to develop these tests. By the end of Cave's life, missions are made out of mostly floors and a couple walls suspended on a platform above decades-old stagnant water in domes made entirely of asbestos. He's trying as best as he can to assemble these tests, and the end result is chambers that eerily mirror Cave's own health. Solid and able in the company's heyday, but sad, incomplete, broken, anemic at the end of it all. Getting to watch Cave's life kind of dissolve in on itself is another major part of what helps the player empathize with GLaDOS, despite playing an antagonistic role literally only a couple hours ago. Carolyn bothers her for some unknown reason, and she's constantly pondering why the name, why the voice is so familiar. GLaDOS starts, in a way, becoming the player's own morality chain, leading them towards specifically tearing down Wheatley, and she enthusiastically agrees with Cave, declaring that he's going to burn down Life's house, not just make lemonade out of a bad situation. He's going down with the ship whether he wants to or not, and he doesn't care at this point, and neither does she. It almost feels as if GLaDOS is Carolyn or something, as if. So we're back up onto the surface, and Wheatley has horrendously plastered his name straight over Aperture's, and he wants the players to engage in tests. You can tell it's a test because he wrote test on the wall. Pressing the button satisfies him, so he has you do it again. It doesn't work, so he needs to assemble new tests. These tests clearly have GLaDOS' design principles in mind, but with many new added twists and caveats as Wheatley jams old tests together in a way he thinks works. We as a player can begin to decipher his own design language. Wheatley's afraid of heights, so most of his tests have gaping holes in the floor for players to stumble into. He resents the player for turning against him, so he uses an excessive amount of force, turrets placed in very obvious locations, trying to kill the player. The excursion funnel first shows up in Wheatley's tests, and he actively uses them to direct the player where he wants them, right into the part where he kills them. And from there, we get to participate in another thrilling chase through Aperture, though this time Wheatley actively goes for the jugular, which, of course, backfires on him as a great many of the tricks he pulls on you are tricks he had you disarm so GLaDOS couldn't use them earlier. And when you arrive to the battle with Wheatley, he explains all the ways he's made sure you can't defeat him the same way you defeated GLaDOS, but because he's an idiot, he leaves very obvious means to defeat him right in front of you. His plans quickly fall apart, and he gets riddled with cores, and at long last, the player can press the stalemate resolution button once again. Wheatley displays that even though he's an idiot, he's a clever idiot. You can only drop into the stalemate resolution chamber from above, and the only portal surface a player can reach is under Wheatley. Dropping in suddenly springs a load of bombs on the player, launching them back out directly in front of him. And then this cool thing happens, and it's all over. GLaDOS deletes Carolyn and sends you on your way. Portal 2's story is still amazing, but the coolest part of it all is how actively the game pushes and pulls players to complete their objectives. It doesn't give you a canned to-do list, steps on a quest. Players trust Wheatley in the first half and feel sympathy for GLaDOS in the back half, which lets her push the players' emotional buttons to get them to power through to the end. And at the end of it all, everyone involved gets to grow and change. Wheatley, over the course of the story, goes on a power trip and leaves himself open because he can't think of any other ways for you to oppose him that aren't exactly what you had done in the first game to GLaDOS. And in the very, very end of the game, he realizes what a mistake all of this was and does kind of feel remorse for his actions. To some extent. At the same time, GLaDOS becomes a more emotionally driven character players more actively get to empathize with and feel a desire to put her back where she belongs, even if it means they might be stuck testing forever. But she has a change of heart that leaves her feeling as though dealing with Chell isn't just worth it anymore. Sometimes the hardest problems in life aren't meant to be fought and agonized over. Sometimes just putting them away and leaving is worth so much more. And through it all, the player gets to actively participate in this epic, sprawling plot, and without saying a word gets to direct the story through their own actions in a natural, well-deserved manner. No locking a player in a room to shout exposition at them, no moments where a player feels the need to question their own actions but can't do anything about it. It's all perfectly planned out, perfectly executed, and the last of its kind. From Valve, at least. From Valve. This was the company's final single-player campaign. From there, Counter-Strike Global Offensive would launch that August, and Dota 2 the following July, and these two games would drive most of the company's profits for the remainder of the new tens. The only other single-player games that weren't VR they'd work on from here on out would be either from Campo Santo, the developers of Firewatch, who were acquired by Valve in 2019, or would be cancelled mid-development as with The Crossing, Stars of Blood, and a trilogy of Half-Life spin-offs. On one hand, I'm glad Valve has found success, but I can't help but feel distraught by just how special Portal 2 is from a narrative perspective, and how Valve has become reluctant to follow in its footsteps. I think I can speak for most people when I say, I miss the old Valve. A Valve complacent with their success and willing to churn out multiplayer games and rely on second parties like Campo Santo and Arcane, they make way more money, sure, but the old Valve was a Valve willing to take risks and experiment with how you can tell a story in a video game. They had so much more charm, so much more character as a company. I'd want nothing more than to hear them announce a new in-house, narrative-driven action game. I know they can do it, and I'll happily be one of the first people there to experience the thrill, the joys, of how Valve, and only Valve, can tell a story through actions and experiences. But until then, Borderlands 3 seems pretty rad. They brought back that thing from the pre-sequel where the characters chat with each other and they put it in their next major installment. That's freaking sweet. Somebody buy me this game, please. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, I'd recommend subscribing. Patreon and social media links are in the description.